retired Canadian colonel who now teaches in the Faculty of Law at the University of Ottawa. He was on the program last week, and here's what he had to say about whether the officials in the department would have known that what they were doing was wrong.
It'd be like somebody crossing a superhighway in downtown Los Angeles not knowing there is traffic there. It is, as I said, it's beyond the pale. And to be using that, they would have known lessons that I've learned at their mother's knees to come out against a Canadian veteran and to treat him as an enemy of the state. And even then, an enemy of the state would have more rights and would have more protection under the law that they give him.
Well, Franksman, interesting comments there from Michelle Drapeau. Knowing what you know about how much civil servants are informed about ethics, how likely is it that the officials involved in this story would not know that what they were doing was wrong?
I can't really comment on that. What appears to be the case is that they didn't twig to it as they ought to have. I don't want to comment on the specific case because I don't know enough about it. But there are a couple of circumstances about the department that I think are worth keeping in mind, which I don't intend to excuse the behavior, but things in the real world are always a great deal more complicated than they appear. The first is that citizenship, that Veterans Affairs has made in very impressive strides over the past 10 to 15 years in service delivery to their clients. And that has been partly as a result of their ability to integrate data. So they have a holistic approach to service delivery that brings all that they know about a client together. They also deal with people, in this case, in two capacities, as persons receiving service, but also as political policy actors. Now, clearly what's happened is that those two things got blended in this circumstance. There could have been legitimate reasons for senior officials in the first capacity, that is to say in the service delivery capacity, to have been briefed in the way that they were briefed, which would have provided them potentially with knowledge that they would have in the policy area. But what is clearly inexcusable is that the policy people in the department were integrating that kind of information into their policy briefings, and as the Commissioner has said, they need better firewalls between those things.
We've talked a little bit about working within the system, and there's a very well-known case of someone who tried to do that. It involves a former official at the Canadian consulate in Hong Kong. His name is Brian McAdam, and he claimed to have found evidence of connections between some staff at the consulate and organized crime in Hong Kong. He reported this through internal channels, I should say. Here he is now on a documentary for W5 talking about what it meant for him personally.
McAdam eventually suffered a nervous breakdown and had to take early retirement.
Do you ever regret having spoken out? Life would have been a whole lot easier if you didn't, you know.
No, personally, I do not regret it. My ethics are such that I had to do what I did. But it's not easy being a whistleblower.
That's an interesting comment there from Brian McAdam. I want to bring Amir Ataran back into the conversation. Mr. Ataran, there are more channels now, we talked about this earlier, for reporting misbehavior than there were back in 1993 when Brian McAdam did it. How much protection do you think they would offer a modern-day Brian McAdam?
I think the protection, if the cards are played right, is fantastic, to be honest. But if they're played wrong, there's no protection at all. And this is why I'm utterly insistent nobody should leak without speaking to a lawyer, and a lawyer who knows public law above all else, because just the way that you approach the problem will make a difference. If you were to write a letter to your superiors under the Public Service Disclosure Protection Act saying, I found the following thing and I think it stinks, it's terribly wrong, the machinery of government will mobilize against you to cover it up. It happens all the time. Ask Mr. McAdam. But if your lawyer does this, and at the same time protects your identity, now that letter is going to be answered by lawyers and government outside the department. You're going to get a completely different answer.
Well, we've been talking a lot about those official channels that now exist because of the whistleblower legislation. The former Privy Council head, Mel Kapp, he resisted the legislation that's now in place to protect whistleblowers, and here's why he says he wasn't in favor of it.
I don't want all public servants using their judgment of what they think government should do. They did not get elected. The accountability regime requires them to be loyal to the government because the government was elected. And the government is accountable in Parliament. And all I was trying to do is to preserve that and therefore maintain the hierarchy of responsibility that goes from the minister to the deputy minister down through the organization.
Ralph Heisman, I want to bring you back in on that point that Melcat made. To what extent do you think that public servants really simply see themselves as loyal foot soldiers to the government and that's it?
Well, I think they do, as a matter of fact, too much at the moment. I have to disagree again with my good friend Mel. It's essential that every public servant make a judgment about public matters, not just because they might, in some extreme circumstance, have to do something. They wouldn't be able to advise public officials well if they didn't do that. So obviously they have to have their own judgments about what is proper action, what is not proper action. And in some circumstances, some extreme circumstances, they may have to do something about it. That might involve a resignation. That might involve making a disclosure. That might involve any number of actions. But it's clearly a necessary part of a public servant's duty. And I think that in recent times, unfortunately, there is a trend in the federal public service to interpret loyalty in too narrow a fashion, to try to demonstrate too clearly that they are loyal to the government of the day, and that's not their role. That's part of their role, but it's not their whole role.
It was interesting that the Public Sector Integrity Commissioner last week in the report about the Brouillet case said that the public servants right now can't express views openly in the marketplace. Amir Adaran, what's your sense of whether there's that sense of being stifled in the civil servants?
No, it's huge. It's absolutely huge, and I have many very dear friends in the public service who simply don't understand the law because the government does everything it can to keep them in the dark. And the law is that your duty of loyalty is to the Crown. It is not, emphasis not, to the elected government of the day. Melcat could not be more ignorant on this point, and he just needs to read the law. It's as simple as that, and public servants also need to understand that the government benefits when they labor under the incorrect understanding that they owe a duty to the elected government. That's why government's underinvesting in teaching ethics, as Ralph points out, because the lack of knowledge helps keep things secret.
The distinction, Mr. Heisman, between being loyal to the Crown versus being loyal to the party or the government in power, how difficult a line is that to walk for civil servants, whether they're new or veterans?
Yeah, I don't entirely agree with the way Amir's putting that there. I think a better way to put it would be to say that we don't have enough clarity at the moment about the line between political and public service roles. This has been recognized by a variety of bodies, including the Gomery Commission, and there are a number of things we need to do about it to define that line between public servants and political actors much more clearly. We need to do it through a charter of public service. We need to do it through implementing more effectively the accounting officer principle. We need to do it through a new appointment system for deputy ministers, and so on. There are a number of things that we need. But we need to clarify those two roles much better than we have today.
Amir Adaran, there are, I would imagine, times where certain information or secrets in government must be kept secret. When would it be unethical, in your view, for someone to leak something?
It would be terribly unethical to leak something that caused another person to be harmed. For instance, if you leaked, for instance, information about an ongoing police investigation that would allow someone to kill a witness, that would be quite a problem. So judgment has to be exercised. It's always there. But this notion that civil servants shouldn't ever exercise judgment and be nice, obedient little cogs in the machinery of government is just wrong, to be honest. And it's an ethical problem above all else, Tom. In the Brouillet case, as hundreds of civil servants were illegally passing around Mr. Brouillet's information, That information they gave in due course to St. Anne's Hospital. Well, immediately, St. Anne's Hospital, that's a place where ethics are strong, wrote back and said, "Do you have Mr. Bruya's permission to be doing this?" And the bureaucrats at Veterans Affairs sort of shucked and jived and then went away. But they were told point blank by the hospital that it should not be done. Here's my question. Why is it in the medical professions, everyone in the hospital, down to the lowest employee, knows medical information cannot be shared around this way? But in the Public Service of Canada, at the highest levels of the policy branch in Veterans Affairs, people didn't know that or were willing to break the law. It comes down to a question of the public service having subterranean ethics. It's as simple as that.
Mr. Axman, I'm curious about how widespread this might be, these kind of practices. Are there more examples in the public service that we just haven't heard about yet, that haven't leaked out, that we may yet hear about? What's your view on that?
Well, I can't answer that question because we don't know what we don't know.
Yeah.
But I want to profoundly disagree with Amir on this point. I frankly don't think his comments on the federal public service